Hey folks, this is Kelani. I've been asked to go through more and more logs on Discord, and I've noticed quite a few patterns emerging from people who want to do the most DPS they possibly can, but something isn't clicking. So let's have a look at the top 5 mistakes DPS are consistently making. The most common mistake I see is resource management, which doesn't just go for DPS. If you mismanage your resource, whether it be focus, rage, mana, runes, or even procs, you're going to be far less effective in whatever role you are. For hunters, I see plenty of people capping focus and losing upwards of 1,000 focus sometimes, just from the passive gain. That translates into an insane amount of damage if you can actually apply it and get off those aim shots for marksmanship or kill commands for beast mastery. Procs are super important too. If you need to be spending them, you really need to be spending them. If you cap out on charges of procs like Fingers of Frost for frost mages, you're just constantly losing potential DPS. When it comes to systems like runes for death knights, you have to keep things rolling any way you can. If you just sit there with too many runes going unused, you start to lose DPS because the amount of runes you can use across an entire encounter starts going down quite rapidly. Make sure you do whatever you need to do so you can keep on top of your resources. Maybe have a look at some weak auras to help you track things or emphasize your resource by making it larger on UI. Anything to help you notice, oh snap, I'm full focus, that shouldn't happen, time to throw off some more abilities. It's really going to help. That leads quite nicely into the next mistake, not being aware of how your class or spec works and what you actually have access to. Quite a few classes were pruned to hell, so it's understandable if you don't think you're all that useful, but I guarantee there's always something you can improve upon. As a hunter, you should be making good use of Binding Shot. It can give tanks a break in dungeons, it can help stun huge groups of adds in raids, and overall is one of the most reliable crowd controls available. Warriors have amazing mobility, which can be used to handle mechanics that others might not be able to, or they can squeeze out a bit more damage before they have to move. But this doesn't just involve utility and crowd control. You should understand how your spells, talents, and artifact traits all work together so you can always make the most of whatever situation you find yourself in, whether it be dungeons, raids, or even PvP. You also need to know what talents excel in what types of content. Usually you'll run a different talent setup for dungeons because they're so trash heavy, which gives great value to AoE damage, and different talents are useful in different raid encounters too, so I'd make sure you always carry a stack of tomes so you can change talents on the fly. You should also be aware of the strengths of your cooldowns and use them appropriately. As a marksmanship hunter, I really only have access to True Shot, and while it's quite powerful on single target, it really shines on AoE and cleave. That means if important adds are coming up in an encounter, saving True Shot can not only increase my overall damage output, but actually be very valuable for the raid group. Quite a few classes are very cooldown reliant, so making sure you get the most out of them is very important. Warriors are a great example of this right now because they have great synergy with the Draft of Souls, but if you don't line up your cooldowns properly or you don't understand how they all work together to ramp up the draft's damage, you're going to lose massive amounts of DPS. The last thing to be aware of would be legendaries. What legendary works well in what situation, and do you change between them? Using the right legendaries for some classes can be a huge DPS increase on specific encounters. It's all good and dandy saying you need to know how your class works. But where do we start? This is where research comes in. There's a whole bunch of resources available for each class from the top players in the game. Every spec is covered on Icy Veins, which is probably one of the most reliable websites for overall information, but there's no reason to stop there. Most classes are also covered on Wowhead as well, and you should always check the author of the guides. If the author is the same chap doing Icy Veins, there's no real point in comparing them, but if the author is different, it's always valuable to get different sources of information so you can check if things add up. If there's any differences between sources, you should be asking why. That's where the real discussion starts, and is honestly one of the best ways to learn about your class. Every class also has a Discord server where you can hop in and join a variety of players and discuss anything from raid encounter setups to what transmogs look the best. I've seen people asking for help dealing with Mythic Plus affixes, raid boss abilities or positioning, and a whole bunch of strategies for dealing with the Mage Tower challenges. It was also super fun being a part of the class discords that had hidden artifact skins back at the start of Legion, as thousands of people were all working together to find out exactly how you can unlock them. You get the same sort of combined efforts when class changes are happening. Everyone is trying to figure out the best way to play. Even if you just sit on the sidelines and don't contribute, it's still a great source of information. You can also get some really good information from YouTube videos which talk about your class, though they typically become outdated much quicker than guides as they can't really be changed once they're on YouTube. You just have to find the updated video. Key topics to research are spec stat priorities, ideal talent setups for varying situations, optimal rotations or spell priorities, how to make good use of your cooldowns, as well as whether or not your rotation changes for your opener. The difference between players who do this research and those who don't is always going to be day and night, and I can always tell when looking through logs. If you want to be up there on DPS meters, you need to do your research. The next one ties in a little bit to the previous two, but it's more about good DPS practice rather than doing as much damage as possible. I've seen so many DPS start tunneling on various bosses for various reasons. Staying on Star Augur when there's a big ad to kill gets you killed because the big ad doesn't die. Ignoring cakes and bombs on Trilliax just because you have to get that extra cast off can wipe the raid. Not soaking ads on Croesus turns into a huge mess because people won't stop hitting the boss for 2 seconds, etc, etc. Nighthold is actually a really great example of tunneling wiping your raid because it can happen on almost every boss. Doing damage is very important. As a DPS, it's actually the only reason we're there, but a dead DPS does no DPS, as my guild leader loves to say. Staying alive and keeping your raid alive comes first and foremost. The trick is learning how to do your damage while also doing everything required of you in an encounter. Being a selfish DPS can really harm your raid's progress, so try not to tunnel on the boss. The other side of this is padding, which is where you do more damage in any given encounter by inflating your numbers on superfluous targets. A lot of people misuse the word padding, so I'll give you 2 solid examples. The first is Scorpion. Some tactics involve stacking the boss on the ad spawn area, so you get to AoE all of the ads and happily drool over the numbers on your meters. Usually, the kills using this tactic take longer, because overall boss damage is lower. The damage isn't really in the right place. You don't have to kill all the ads to defeat the encounter, so you're inflating your numbers for the sake of it. The other boss which sticks out like a sore thumb is Tichondrius, especially on Mythic. On Mythic, there's no chance you're going to DPS down the ads while they're being tanked near the boss, but that doesn't stop people happily throwing AoE into them. Any AoE spent on those ads which reduces your single target damage against Tichondrius is actually counterproductive, even if you're seeing higher numbers. You might be top damage, but if you're lowest boss damage, you're still on the bottom of the meters. Doing high DPS isn't really worthwhile if the damage isn't in the right place. There's a reason why Warcraft logs picks apart logs and removes some parts of your damage or healing, and doesn't count Scorp or Tyche in the overall stats or for all stars. With everything added together, there's still one huge thing missing. You're not going to be doing anything close to competitive damage in any type of content if you don't have a clue what you're doing in said content. Raiding is the big one here, and it's also the most likely area of the game where people actually want to improve their performance. If you don't know what to expect when going into a boss encounter, how can you hope to perform optimally? This doesn't mean you have to read an essay on every fight, or go hunting through YouTube for a 20-minute explanation of every single boss ability. Looking through the dungeon journal would be a good start, and there's always some really cool, concise picture guides on Reddit whenever a new raid comes out. Being prepared is awesome, but paying attention and making note of ability timings is going to be worth far more. There's a reason why add-ons like Deadly Boss Mods and Bigwigs are so widely used. Getting used to the pattern or the dance of the fight is 90% of the battle. Usually our first few pulls on progression bosses are quite low damage across the board, but as more and more people get used to the abilities, how to deal with them and when they occur, our damage spikes through the roof. When you know what to expect, you can prepare for it. You can move retroactively and be where you need to be before you need to be there. That allows you to control your movement so you can keep your rotation going without interruptions. If you are picking your butt and reactively moving after an ability is cast, you're spending your time moving instead of DPSing. With Hunter Logs specifically, I see this so often, and that's why people are losing so much focus. They're moving across the room because they weren't there already, and while they're moving, their focus bar is full and they're not casting anything to spend it. It's either a problem with not knowing the mechanics and not knowing where to be, or they're just tunneling the boss until something reminds them they actually have mechanics to do. It's a loss of DPS all the same. Honestly, the best way to work up to being on top is learning the encounter and then fitting your rotation in. It does take a bit of patience, but if you want to improve, it's the best way to go about things. If you're happy with how you play and you want to be bothered with squeezing every drop of damage out of your character, that's fine too. You do you. But if you're like me and enjoy performing well, these are the best tips I can give you. So that's the top 5 mistakes I've been seeing over and over after going through people's logs who are asking for help with their DPS. If you have any questions or queries, please leave them in the comment section below and I'll get back to you as soon as possible, or hop on over to Discord. We have a server at discord.gg/Kelani, great place to come ask questions or just hang out. Remember to leave a like just below the video before you leave, and if you want to see more, make sure to subscribe. But apart from that, thanks for watching folks, good luck and have fun, and as always I will see you next time.